In the next 3 sessions, we're going to pull fear through a process. And in Roland's normal way, it's going to have stories, old man stories. And I enjoy telling stories, but I don't mind telling parables. And in this, we'll be working with fear. And we're working with, first, crises. Second, fear and preparation. Third, middle management's fears. And the fourth, when fears disappear. Now, crisis management fear. I'm going into a story. Back when I was in 6th grade, which is about 50-some years ago, over half a century. I used to go down to the local park, and I lived in the cities, Minneapolis. And it wasn't as bad as Detroit then, but it was still had some rough sections. And I'd go down the park every day for years. And I got to know everyone there. We never had a problem. One day we were playing basketball out on the basketball court. And I looked up on the hill, and walking down the hill was this group. And they were just joking back and forth and sort of hitting each other. Rough-looking group. And we just kept playing basketball. I just sort of kept an eye on them. And they came up and they stood at the end of the basketball court there, and they said, "We want to play basketball." You know, the one tough guy. I looked at him and I said, how am I going to handle this? Because you got that little creepy feeling in your back, and you got this thing, and he had a whole group of guys behind him. And I was frightened. I was scared. But then, my bravery increased as I looked over at the window and saw the field manager standing there looking. So my bravery extended itself, and I said, "Yeah, you can play right after us." And he says, "No, we're on a play right now. Give us the basketball." I says, "No." And he started to walk over to me, and I walked up to him. I says, and we sat and stared at each other, and his gang sort of got around. And I said, "No." And I was sitting there, I was wondering if the manager had turned around. And manager didn't. All of a sudden I heard, "What are you guys doing here?" And I looked over. I said, "Thank God. I did plan it right, but I was scared. There was a gang around me." And this fellow looks at me and he says, "Let's go." He looked at me and he says, "I'll get you. Don't worry, I'll get you." And they took off and headed out of the park. Well, I had never seen these kids before, and I thought I'd never see them again. Things happen in life, and they pass through. And people try to scare you now and then. Well, you have this little residual sitting back there, and I let it go. And about 3 months later, I was over at what they call our Nile Theater. Where, you walk a mile or so to the theater on Saturdays to watch a movie. And I went in there, and who did I meet in the lobby? Mr. Tough Guy, Mr. Gang Leader, and his motley crew. And I got scared again. He says, "I'll get you." And that scared me. And Before the movie was over, I snuck out the back of the theater and ran home because I was scared. This was a crisis. Because I now knew that he was in my country and he would appear again. So how was I going to handle this? Now I could sit and be scared of him the rest of my life. That's a choice I had. Or I could start preparing to handle him. So for the next 6 months, I'd see him every once in a while at the theater, but during that time, I started getting ready. And I'd go over to the Sibley Field again, and I'd get on the parallel bars, and I would do push-ups. And I'd get on the high bar, and I'd do pull-ups. And I'd do pull-ups this way, and I'd do pull-ups so I could do this. And they had big hills, and I'd run up the hills. And I'd run down the hills, and I'd run around that park. And every time I didn't want to, this fear nagged at my back and said, "You're going to have to face him sometime," because he would harass me every time I saw him. And I just absolutely worked out. And I super worked out. And if I could have heard a Rocky song then, when I ran up those stairs, it would have been Rocky Roland. However, when you're doing that and you're doing it alone, you don't know how much you have to do. You're absolutely terrified, you're all alone, and no one's going to come to your aid. And you're terrified and you just keep working. And what I found then was fear was my friend. Because with fear, I kept working out harder and harder and harder. Well, what happened? About 7 months later, he still harassed me. And then finally, he got up to pushing me in the theater. And then saying something quite relevant about my mother. And I just couldn't handle it anymore. And I looked at his gang and I said, how can I handle this? Because I had thought different scenarios if I had to face this. I says, you're just going to get your friends to fight for you, aren't you? He says, no, I'm not. I'm going to take you on. I'm going to beat your butt. He didn't say butt, but he was close. And I looked at him and I said, okay, let's go out right now into the parking lot. Because I couldn't have been much readier, but I had no idea what I was ready for. So we went out into the parking lot. And I was frightened. I was scared. Because they had not one person, but about 7 people. And I was prepared. And I was angry. My fear had turned to anger. And when I got there, I turned around and he swung at me. I went under his swing, and I was so angry, I lifted him up over my head, and I threw him onto the ground, and I jumped on him, and I hit him, and I hit him, and I hit him, and I put out 6 months of anger on him. And all of a sudden I heard this, I says, oh, well, I'm going to keep hitting him because his buddies are going to pounce on me in a second. So I just kept hitting him. Because I didn't know what would stop him. And all of a sudden I got grabbed I pulled away. I says, uh-oh, I've got to fight his 7 friends now. And I got up and I swung and someone grabbed my arm. I says, uh-oh, I've really had it. And the cop said to me, take it easy, son. It's all over. Well, they grabbed me and they took me and put me in the police car. And then they said, we're taking you home. And they drove me home, got in front of my house. And my ma saw me getting out of a police car. And she comes running out and she says, I've got a good boy, I've got a good boy. Because I never had any problems. And the policeman walked up and I just didn't say anything. Because I was exhausted, I was tired, and I was still frightened for what was going to happen now. And he looks and he says to my mom, your boy just beat up some guy pretty bad. He says, however, this kid has been a local thug for a long time. And he needed it. And as far as we're concerned, it's all over. Take care of your son, ma'am. And he walked away. And my ma took me in. And then I had to tell the story, because I had never shared it with her. And my dad drove me over to the thug's house and made me apologize. And I got then about fear. Fear motivated me to move me on to winning. So fear is a stopper, but it's also a wonderful tool to move you along in life. Next time, we'll talk about fear in middle management. Thank you.